Good afternoon, everyone. This is Andy Reese with Department on Disability Services. Welcome to our monthly forum. I wanted to start with a couple of quick announcements, one of which is because in our fourth Friday in November is the day after Thanksgiving, and our fourth Friday in December is the day before the Christmas holiday. And therefore, we're going to have just one forum for November/December, and that forum will occur on December 9th. An updated invite will be going out regarding that forum, probably early next week. And one of the things that you will notice with our forum invitations in the future and our notices is that we'll also be asking for your input. If there are topics that you'd like for us to present about in our monthly forum, please do. We'll give you instructions about where you can submit those suggestions and submit those, please. We do have a group of people who work together each month to plan the forum. And so we can then bring this to that group and hope that we continue to have really constructive, informative forums for everyone every month. We have two really good presentations today. One of them is regarding the, one of them is about the racial equity efforts here at Department on Disability Services. And the other one, it will be about benefits planning for people who receive social SSI or SSDI. We will also, after I do an update on our current COVID numbers, we will also have a brief update from Kevin Wright, I believe, regarding our Employment First Summit. It'll be a brief summary. The summit did just occur. There will be a more in-depth coverage of what was discussed at the summit next month when we meet for the November-December meeting, actually month after next in early December. I do see that a person has their hand up, so you can unmute and ask your question if your hand is up because you have a question.
No, good morning. I don't have a question. I was just trying to respond that I can see the transcripts.
You say you can or cannot? Can.
I said the question was asked, who can see this transcript? So I raised my hand up that I can see it.
Very good. Thank you.
All right.
So now, Charlize, if you can share the one pager with the COVID data, please. Thank you. Scroll down just a little bit. Thanks. So in the month of October so far, for people, we've had 714 people who've been diagnosed with COVID, 4 in the month of October. So fortunately, it does seem to have started to slow down a little bit. We've also seen the community transmission rate has bumped down a couple of times in the last month to moderate. So that's a positive thing for our providers in terms of the PPE requirements where they need to be tracking the CDC COVID tracker in order to ensure they're complying with the DC health guidance around PPE. By placement type, in terms of COVID infections, we've had 1 person in a correctional facility, 18 in host homes, 130 in intermediate care facilities, 1 in a mental health facility, 154 in their natural homes, 2 in nursing homes, 6 in out-of-state placements, 60 in residential habilitation placements, and 342 in supported living placements. In the month of October, the 4 people who have contracted COVID included 3 people who were in supported living and 1 in an ICF. Fortunately, in terms of people who have gotten COVID, we have not had someone who has required inpatient treatment for COVID since May. People who have lost their lives to COVID to date, there have been 38 people. We have had, of people who have contracted COVID who have died, there have been 80. However, 34 of those have been confirmed as not being COVID related, and we're still awaiting the cause of death for 8. In terms of vaccination rates, we're not updating this as frequently, in part because of some of the shifting requirements regarding the vaccination. So for example, the DDS staff, the booster rate appears to go down, but that's just because we're not tracking it anymore because it is no longer a requirement. And so there are people that would appear to be requiring to have it and just aren't reporting it because it's not required. But DDS staff who have gotten the booster, we have confirmed 98% of DDS staff have received the COVID vaccine. 90% were current with their boosters at the point in time that the agency stopped being required to track that. But we have this similar issues with provider staff, except that there is the DC health regulation that requires that direct care staff have the vaccination. And as of October 7th, 90% of provider staff did have that. At this time, the additional requirement to be current with COVID vaccines is no longer in place. And so based on the information we have, that's at 70%. For the people that we support, 88% have received their vaccinations, which includes 100% of people in residential habilitation, 99% of people in ICFs, 95% of people in host homes, 94% in supported living, and 79% in natural homes. In terms of boosters, according to our records, 78% of people are current with their boosters. So the agency, as I think I've mentioned before, we did get approval from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services for our waiver renewal and our waiver amendment. And as of October 1, we did go live with the expansion of eligibility for DDA services to include all people with developmental disabilities. We've received just over 40 people have come in to apply for services since that time, and we're working with them to make sure that they have, that they're able to gather everything they need for a completed application and eligibility process, so that we're able to move people who are eligible through to services. If Kevin is with us and would like to just provide a brief overview of the Employment First Summit that occurred, was it just last week? Mm-hmm. There have been a lot of events in the last couple of weeks. Is Kevin right here? Let me just say.
I don't see him in the list.
Perhaps he'll be joining us later in the meeting, and at that time, we will we'll ask him to provide that update.
Can I come, if I have a question or concern, can I voice it out?
Sure. So if people have questions, you can feel free to ask the question. You can unmute and ask it, or you can also, and I'll get to Carol's as soon as I finish with you. You can also type that question in the chat. So please go ahead.
Okay, mine is a concern actually regarding the new providers. For instance, my agency has been approved since 2020, but we haven't received a single case. Is there anything we call providers equity or in the system? I mean, I'm saying this because I'm told that there's an expansion coming up, and with the expansion that is coming, do you anticipate that there will be some element of fairness to ensure that, especially providers that have been in the system since 2020 and has no single case, can at least have something working with? My other concern is that
Wait a minute. You asked one question, and so let us respond to that. And then, given that we do have a couple of pretty substantive presentations, I'm gonna get started with those to make sure we get to the presentations, and then I'll be answering questions at the end.
Okay.
Sure.
So my telephone number is 202-730-1618. And I'll gladly speak to you specifically regarding this concern. And just for general purposes, the Department of Disability Services cannot shut the door on providers coming in who seek to do business with the District of Columbia. My experience has found that not many providers do research on the needs of certain services prior to their going in to seek to do that work. And it does create a stress for them. And I've spoken to many about this, so I'm more than versed in being able to talk to you about that specific problem. Give me a call at your convenience.
The other thing is, this sounds like, I mean, we do have a monthly provider leadership meeting. Shasta's here. And these are the kinds of questions that perhaps could be addressed at those meetings, I think.
Yes, these are the type of questions that should be addressed at those meetings. The meetings are held at least quarterly. So if you're not invited or a person from your organization is not invited to the meetings, please email that point of contact to shastabrown@dc.gov. I will put my email address in the chat.
So let me just quickly go through the questions that are in the chat, and then if you could bring up the PowerPoint so that Charlotte can begin her presentation regarding the racial equity initiative at DDS. I see Carol's question about whether will DDS be making the 10-1 eligibility change more readily available on its website. I mean, it's on the website. I don't know what to say other than that. I know that we're making some adjustments to the application where it refers to DDA application. It is referenced in that same place. We have changed the language to clarify that it's that what the eligibility is. We did have information out when the eligibility expanded. Website, and you know, the more we put there, the harder it is to find things there.
Well, Andy, it's kind of right now there's two fact sheets that are really kind of buried on the page about applications, but there's not anything prominent saying as of October 1st, there was a change in eligibility criteria. People are having a lot of trouble finding it, and they're not really even sure it's taken effect yet.
We can look into, because we can look at the cycling panes. I'll talk to someone about this later and see which ones of those we are authorized to adjust and see if we could put it in one of those. So there's a question here about a mask mandate now with DDS as it has been dropped in the majority of places. So for providers, you need to look at the DC health guidance around what's required for PPE in certain settings. In terms of the district, you can also look at coronavirus.dc.gov, and it will give you information regarding any requirements in that regard. District government buildings, for example, there's not a requirement except in some. And so I don't want to, that's why I hesitate to make any broad statements about what it is or is not. So you should be checking the coronavirus.dc.gov website and be looking at, I mean, for people who, for providers, you should be looking at the provider specific requirements regarding PPE. And then, as I said, keeping track, because some of those align with the CDC tracking of community, I'm forgetting the name of it. It's the last one in the drop-down menu. I want to say community spread, but it's, anyway, they align with that at the CDC. So you need to be watching the CDC website in order to keep up with what those requirements are, because they're in the coronavirus.dc.gov website. But in that website, you then have to look over at the CDC site and pull up the other thing you will see when you go to the CDC website is the community level, which currently in the district is low, and it gives guidance about what that means in terms of masking and such. And then you also look at community transmission, the community transmission rate, which in the district right now is moderate, and that also itself has an impact on what the requirements are for providers. So, oh, Charlotte's going to be sharing her screen.
I just didn't want to
Oh,
disrupt
please.
the flow of the discussion.
So Charlotte King, who is our, Charlotte King, I'm sorry, I don't know how that happened. Charlotte Roberts, who is the performance management program manager
Yes.
at DDS, and is leading the racial equity efforts at DDS, is going to talk about those and provide some information about how we can get some input from folks around our initiatives that we are launching.
Sure. Well, thank you for that, Director Reese. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Charlotte Roberts, as stated, and I do have the distinct pleasure of speaking with you all today about the racial equity efforts here at DDS. And I am just a member of a small but mighty team here. So I do want to acknowledge Mark Augusto, Fakisha Guy, Kwame King, and Deputy Director Winslow Woodland for their efforts with this initiative. So what I have dropped in the chat is a link to what is also being shared on the screen. And it's just a way for us to collect some feedback in real time regarding the 4 distinct goals that we'll be talking about regarding our racial equity work, as well as some general considerations that we should keep in mind as we continue to go through the process of developing our plan and submitting it to the racial equity, the Office of Racial Equity. And we know in terms of we are all experienced experts, while some of us have lived experiences, and some of the things we'll be talking about, you've either had a personal experience or you've advocated on behalf of someone who's had an experience with some racial inequity or things like that. So we really hope to have a meaningful discussion, but given the limit of time, we also do hope that everyone chooses to utilize this virtual whiteboard as a way to really collect some feedback. So we do have, for those who may not be familiar, if you just want to access this green circle with the cross in the section, you can have the drop down and you'll add your sticky note where you can type a word, an expression, a comment, really anything that you think aligns with the work that we're doing and what we should keep in mind as we're working through. So I'm just going to switch to a different tab so we can get to the presentation. So just give me a couple of seconds to switch over here. So again, we do want to make the most of this session. So we're going to just kind of start with outlining just key goals that we really hope we can kind of collaborate and take away from this discussion. So we are going to provide just a very brief background and context discussion for the racial equity work in general. We're going to provide a very informative update on the work that's happening specifically within DDS. We're going to specifically talk about those 4 key performance areas and goals associated with those areas. And then time permitting, we're going to either kind of go through some of the comments that have been posted on that virtual whiteboard, or we will certainly within our plan provide a section that has either public comments and then our responses to those comments and how it was incorporated into our plan. So just a very short background, and it's not to say that these were the specific areas or points of research that were considered as the district decided to launch some of the legislative action behind it, but it really is just brought into this presentation to provide some of that global context for the presence of it and the social context for it. So in this presentation, there are links to the specific research articles from peer-reviewed journals if you do want to have some more information, but just to kind of outline some of the specifics, there was one research paper that was done on analyzing the educational attainment of people with ID across a time frame. I mean, this data was pulled from the 1950s to 2017, so that historical context is present in the data, which we always love to see. But it really is just saying, and again, I'm not going to kind of reiterate everything on the slide, but essentially over time, even though there were these increases in the educational attainment amongst people with ID over time, though there were some disparities across racial and ethnic groups, and Black adults with ID had the lowest probability of attaining a high school degree or more. And that research was published out of Syracuse University. The second article is out of the Journal of Mental Health and Research. I have my notes on the side. And again, not to really belabor the point of the research, but really just to show, as we're kind of continuing to learn from this COVID-19 pandemic and review the research, individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups are having disproportionately ill and adverse reactions and responses to COVID-19 when compared to kind of their counterparts. And it really just points to the need for there to be more cultural considerations into the health aspects of this cross-section of race and racial identity and ID, but also the biases that exist within health access and kind of sustainability and long-term health outcomes. And lastly, when you kind of think of the National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disability Services, NASDs, they also started holding these really poignant state-focused conversations, these roundtable discussions on diversity, equity, and inclusion, just kind of highlighting, again, this isn't just a kind of a spot problem. This is something that we need to address globally, as well as kind of specifically from top down, so that it really can inform a bottom-up conversation. Sorry about that. So again, just kind of bring it back to what's happening in the district. So the Office of Racial Equity was enacted or kind of composed in 2021 in response to the Racial Equity Achieves Results Act. And again, those references are going to be found at the end of the presentation. But really the kind of the core tenets or the premises of it were that we have to change infrastructure and policies and procedures to really impact change and have longstanding change in the lives of district residents who may suffer from any type of racial bias or racial inequities. And the work that we do, when you have that intersectionality between disability and kind of compounded racial identities, racial and social identities, you can imagine the concern is that much more grand. So the way that was the plan for that really is when you're talking about shifting policy and advocacy and really shifting culture, was that specific agencies will be tasked with analyzing their information, analyzing their data, and really taking a charge in completing the work and advocating on the behalf of those supported by their agency. And every time I have an opportunity to speak on this great work, I have to kind of take my hat off to Director Reese, who kind of answered the call. This was a volunteer effort for agencies to get involved in, and just kind of understanding the impact and the importance of it, you know, threw our hat in the ring and said, of course, you know, we accept the charge and we're going to run with it. So I always admire that leadership decision and am honored to be involved in the work. So when we talk about the Office of Racial Equity mission statement, right, it really is to just impact program development, leadership structure, really to just not attack, that was very aggressive, but really to monitor our systems of change from these key points of leadership and these key points of decision-making. And the definition that they're really motivated by is racial equity as a process, and that those who are often impacted by systems of bias or anything sometimes aren't involved in the decision-making process that ultimately impacts their lives. So really as a process, you know, those who are impacted by decisions are involved in the decision-making process. And then as an outcome, we see that racial equity is achieved when race is no longer a prominent decision point in how positive health outcomes are monitored, or the distribution of resources and things like that. So while it is not a turnkey, you know, you wake up one day and it is all ameliorated, it is a process, but it's really from that context of those who are most impacted by policies and programs have to have their voice equally heard in the conversation. So I know we're talking about it specifically from the district level, but there's also activity on the federal side. You know, if you're paying attention at all, you're hearing diversity, equity, and inclusion in a lot of different realms and a lot of different spaces. And it's not buzzwords, it's just really indicative of the importance of the work and the understanding that it has to be ingrained in how we're making laws and how laws are implemented at the states and at the ground level. So again, don't want to read through specifically everything on the slides, but the executive order with advancing racial equity and support for undeserved communities through the federal government, when that executive order was announced, CMS did follow up with their own framework for health equity. And those of you who do know, HCBS has, CMS, I should say, has released new quality measures for their HCBS waiver program that is informed by these kind of core aspects of racial equity, right? It's to expand the collection, reporting, and analysis of standardized data. How are we going to tell that story? You know, assess causes of disparities, building a capacity amongst healthcare organizations, advancing language access, and to inform all aspects of the healthcare system, right? It's not a catch-all, it's not a cure-all. There are multiple facets of these concerns and these program changes that we have to deliberately identify and deliberately address. So it's all the work that we're doing is really informed by the district's work, but also what is also being promoted at the federal level. So then bringing it back to what we're doing in-house. In addition to our mission statement, we've also included, we have submitted a proposed vision statement that really helps to narrow that focus on how we choose to model our work behind this. And it really is ingrained in our racial equity strategic initiative, which we actually had in our plan prior to the Office of Racial Equity kind of making it a mandate. So again, that is a testament to our leadership and the visionary aspect of the work that we're doing, knowing that before there's an ask for a call to action, we kind of understand what the needs are, and we're going to address our system appropriately. So we have mastered the ability to really understand the needs of the people that we support, and we were hoping to capture it in that vision statement, as well as in the ongoing work for our strategic initiative. So more background on how the DDS internal action team is working on this effort. So as DDS being selected as a pilot agency to volunteer with this effort, we've been asked to pilot different racial equity tools to include ways that we are advancing policies, the way that we are designing our budgets. They really are informed by these specific resources that have to expand our perspective on how we're not only defining, but applying our understanding of disseminating information on decreasing any type of racial bias and inequity in the work that we do. We had to complete a 7-part departmental assessment, which really gave us an opportunity to really look under the hood and have an honest conversation with ourselves as staff and as leaders, but also to get some meaningful feedback that just further informed the development of our plan, that racial equity plan. And so while we all have this expectation to really monitor the work of this racial equity initiative, the work of DDS in terms of other agencies that are involved is going to be a bit different. So you'll see how some of those differences play out when we kind of go through our key metrics and our key goals. So there are 4 specific goals that all agencies will share. DDS staff understand and are committed to achieving racial equities, goal 1. Goal 2, DDS is committed to eliminating racial and ethnic inequities. Goal 3, DDS is committed to meaningfully involving community and strengthening community partnerships. And goal 4, DDS is an equitable employer and engages in racially equitable hiring practices. So again, we're going to continue to go through the presentation and kind of walk through these goals, but I encourage you, as you're kind of hearing the presentation, and if you have thoughts, feedback from your own expert opinion as a experienced advocate or anything like that, as you have feedback, please feel free to jot down your thoughts or your comments in that virtual whiteboard. So all sounds great, all sounds amazing, but how are we going to operationalize it and really get the work done? So with goal 1, with DDS staff understanding are committed to achieving racial equity, those desired outcomes are really centered on kind of increasing our awareness as an internal staff through training and information sharing. And how kind of that will manifest itself is just the recognition and inclusion of cultural identities. So the charge from the Office of Racial Equity is, as we present these goals, kind of what is your desired outcome in relation to these goals? And then how will you know that that outcome exists? What are some of the things that will be present? So it really is a kind of grassroots conversation where we're looking at this information, kind of pulling from resources currently existing in our service delivery system, our data reporting and repository systems, but also recognizing what things we may have to build to really meet this need. So as a response to this, a potential KPI or key performance indicator is that we develop a new PCO tool centered on aspects of racial identity and social experiences. Recent data from, I believe, the 2019 American Community Survey is stated that kind of 18.8% of Black district residents have a disability compared to like 4.2% of white residents or 6.8 Hispanic residents. Now, I didn't give those specific breakouts on what type of disability, but you could scale down with those proportions, I'm sure. But what it's indicative of is that when people come into the door to seek services, they're often showing up with more than what's available in their paperwork, and their stories are more centered on things that we may not be capturing, those compound identities and how we need to really understand the full aspects of a person so that we can provide the best services. That performance measure associated with that would be just the number of planning meetings held aimed at tool development. Not saying that we will get it right in the first year, not saying that we have these lofty goals that we don't want to over promise and under deliver, but really how many meaningful discussions are we going to have, including community input, to help us thoroughly design a tool that can be implemented in our intake procedures and our ISP development procedures and things like that. Another supporting action would be just to provide opportunities for training. The Office of Racial Equity has allowed for a train the trainer series where internal DDS staff went through the cohort of training, and now that body of knowledge exists within our building, which we can utilize to kind of support the current trainings offered by DCHR, but also to develop our own curriculum centered on the needs that we know for the people that we support. For goal 2, well, DDS is committed to eliminating racial and ethnic inequities. It really is streamlined on kind of building on these person-centered practices as we look to the expansion of services and program supports. And really one way that is documented or shown is that racial equity is considered at all program and procedure development stages. One way we can do this is through using the sanctions budget equity tool during our FY24 budget preparations, as well as using some of the other racial equity tools as we update our policies and procedures, which we've already done to even include the definition of equity and inclusion so that that language is present in all of our work moving forward. But another way is that we continue to work through our strategic initiative that we've had in place since FY21. That includes the updates that we already have to make to the Office of the City Administrator, but also how we're going to continue to review existing data to understand if there are many underserved or unserved communities that really can be impacted by a more focused outreach efforts and things like that. Goal 3, DDS is committed to meaningfully involving community and strengthening community partnerships. I think when we kind of had to adjust to the new virtual workforce, I mean, I think DDS really knocked it out the park in terms of establishing these virtual platforms where we can keep the network strong and keep that communication flowing. And so we hope to do the same thing, but just add a new layer of this racial equity conversation. So in terms of continuing with outreach, it's just how do we sponsor any type of community outreach that's not only focused on the needs of the community, but also how do we apply this racial equity perspective so that the resources and the conversation are really focused on things that are impacting the day-to-day lives of district residents who may also be in need of our services. And again, as we continue to find ways to disseminate information, is how do we develop flyers, brochures, or something so that we can not only have these amazing meetings, but also there's a takeaway to where you can have a resource guide at your home, at your desk, in your car, wherever, so that you don't kind of lose this information once you leave these spaces, but it's something that you kind of can take with you and share with others in your network. 4, DDS is an equitable employer and engages in racially equitable hiring practices. We, again, kind of getting ahead of the curve. I know that members of our our internal HR team have already kind of had this informal structure in place where we've been mentoring or training other HR staff on just the understanding of equitable hiring practices, especially hiring people with disabilities. And we just continue to using those internal training resources to kind of develop more robust and formal training that aligns with the HR side of the work, but also with this new informed perspective and understanding. So that is essentially our proposed metrics at the time for the 4 goals that we have in place. And again, while we do hope to collect some feedback and time permitting, I know we have some other presentations to get to, time permitting, we can circle back to that feedback, but please utilize access to that link, not only today, but at any point. We do plan to have our plan sent to the Office of Racial Equity by November 15th, around that second week of November. But there are some iterations where we can kind of update language and really ensure that the community feedback is ingrained in the work that we do. So again, a much appreciation to our internal action team, Director Reese for the vision and even getting us involved in the first place. And these are the references that we spoke about today. So that's it. If there are no other comments or questions or concerns, I know time is of the essence. So I'm sure time permitting we'll get back to anything at the end of the presentation.
Oh, shoot. Let me see if I have any cash. I don't think I have any cash. Oh, no, I have some cash. Can you hold on or can you give it to me? How much tip you gonna leave?
So if people have a question, they can unmute and ask their question for Charlotte before we move on. Otherwise, if people could please mute.
Yeah, I have a question for Ms. Charlotte. From the discussion in Goal 1, how do we reconcile what most of our clients put in the paper, and when we see them, they have so much more than they put in the paper. So how do we reconcile the paper and the in-person presentation?
So great question. And I think part of kind of reconciling paper with need is making sure that we understand that it's not just paper at the beginning. These really should be tools that we use, not just to, check boxes or to make sure that we have someone's demographic profile or on record, but it really is a meaningful, structured discussion on aspects of identity, aspects of experience, aspect of social, emotional, physical, mental need. And that may require some PCO engagement, some development of new tools and questions. But I think the core first step is that we redefine what this pretty paper is and give more meaning and context to it at the onset.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That was a good answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next up, and as I said, as we move along, you can always feel free, please, to type any questions in the chat. Next up, we have a presentation from Marquita Seiler, who is at DDS. She is our benefits counselor here and also works with some of the contractors that we have that provide benefits counseling. As people know, in the last few months, we've had a number of different issues come up and questions come up regarding the impact of employment and earnings on people's benefits. And so we thought that having Marquita do her presentation would be really helpful. Fortunately, today also, Eva Richardson with Disability Rights DC is with us. She is not here to do a presentation, but Disability Rights DC both provides advocacy themselves and connects people to advocacy when they have issues related to their benefits. And so after Marquita, she can talk a little about that and answer any questions from the advocacy perspective. So Marquita.
Good morning, everyone. Hi. So I am here. I am Dr. Marquita Seiler Tyler, and I am the Certified Benefits Specialist here at DDS. And I will go ahead and start the presentation. This is just a benefits counseling overview. It's not my complete presentation. It's just to give you an idea of what I do here and a little bit about benefits. So we're going to start with what are benefits. So Social Security benefits are payments that are made to qualified retired adults and people with disabilities and to their spouses, children, and survivors. And people usually don't know the difference between SSI and SSDI. A lot of people will come into my orientations and they will know they're getting something, but they won't know what that something is. So supplemental security income, which is SSI, is a needs-based. It's needs-based, and you can't have any resources over $2,000 if you're an individual or $3,000 for couples. You do not have to have ever worked before with SSI, and you have to either be an elderly person or a person with a disability. Contrastly, for SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Insurance, it is based on work credits. You not only have to have worked before, but you have had to earn enough work credits while paying into the system to be able to pull from this money. Now, I didn't say elderly person with Social Security Disability Insurance, because if you are a person of a certain age and you've paid into the system, you're going to be pulling from retirement. And at the beginning of every year, there's what's called a cost of living adjustment that Social Security will provide. At the beginning of 2022, it was 5.9%. Just to show people the impact that it had on benefits, it raised the maximum federal benefit rate for SSI from $794 to $841 for individuals, and from $1191 to $1261 for couples. And the maximum federal benefit rate is just the most that you're going to get for SSI. It doesn't mean that's what you're going to get for SSI. Okay, so what is benefits counseling? Benefits counseling is just a process in which a certified benefits specialist will analyze a person's benefits such as SSI, SSDI, etc. Give beneficiaries or persons with give beneficiaries which are persons receiving. I'm sorry.
People who are not speaking, if you could please put yourselves on mute. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, so and Amy, I'm sure you're anxious to jump in and yell out numbers or corrections. If you could please hold that at the end, you'll have an opportunity to probably answer anything if you need to. Analyze a person's benefits such as SSI or SSDI, give beneficiaries such as beneficiaries or persons that are receiving benefits, an insight on how benefits may be impacted by employment. So it also will provide information on work incentives and other programs that may assist beneficiaries with retaining most or in some cases all of their benefits when they return to work, and also assist beneficiaries in making informed decisions about what employment goals work best with their individual circumstances. So why is benefits counseling important? It provides beneficiaries with the information that they need to make informed decisions about employment. And it also gives them options by informing them about what work incentives they may help them go back to work and safeguard them, if not all, safeguard some, if not all of their benefits. It also helps them understand the impact of employment on benefits so that they can avoid pitfalls such as overpayments. And some examples are if you're receiving SSI and you go back to work, a lot of people think that you're automatically going to lose your benefits, and that's not the case. If you go back to work, if you don't exceed the earned income limits, you may be able to still retain some of your benefits. And your Medicaid may also continue to, even if you go back to work and your cash benefits stop, if you are not able to afford other medical care and you depend on Medicaid in order to work. Okay, so ABLE accounts are accounts that are for eligible people with disabilities to save money to be able to pay for qualified disability expenses that are related to designated disabilities or expenses that they have. And these funds can also be used to pay for things that a beneficiary needs to improve or maintain their health or their quality of life. So what about students? So most scholarships or grants that are used to pay for tuition, books, or other expenses that are directly related to getting an education don't count as income when you go to school or are in a training program. Also, there's what's called a student earned income exclusion, where $2,040 of your monthly earnings up to a maximum of $8,230 a year can be excluded when calculating your SSI cash payment. So people want to know what happens if I go back to work and I'm on SSDI. So if you need supports in order to work, there are special rules that allow some of your earnings to be excluded when figuring your SSDI cash payment. And if your SSI or your SSDI benefits have ended because of earnings from work and you again become unable to work due to your disability, you have 60 months, which is 5 years, which you can request reinstatement of benefits without filing a new application. A ticket to work is something that a lot of people ask a question about. They usually have heard of it, but are not quite sure what it is. Ticket to Work is a free and voluntary program, and it's meant for people who are receiving benefits in their ages 18 through 64 and have a disability, and it allows them to be able to expand their vocational options. People are allowed to take their ticket to an employment network, which is just a place that has been vetted or approved by Social Security to provide employment services to people with disabilities. And they are taking their ticket to these people, and their ticket will then be assigned to that employment network, signaling Social Security that they are now working with this employment network to get back into the workforce. It protects the person with a disability against having to go through medical reviews, and the employment network in turn is rewarded, so to speak, or given incentives by being paid for the progress off of that person going back into the workforce. So what is a trial work period? So when a person with a disability returns to work for 9 months and not necessarily consecutively or back to back, a person can earn as much as they want to without it affecting their SSDI cash benefit. And if the 9 months of trial work do not fall within a 60-month period of time, they may have even longer to test their ability to work. And earnings of $970 a month or more equals one trial work period service month. And at the end of the trial work period, your cash benefits will stop. However, you have at least 36 months after a successful trial work period, where if you continue to work while you are disabled, you may receive a cash payment for any of the months that your earnings fall below the substantial gainful activity level. And keep in mind, with cost of living adjustments, these numbers are all going to change. So these numbers may be a little different than it's right now. How many hours can I work on disability benefits? That is a question a lot of people have when they first come in. It's not really based on hours, it's more based on earnings. So Social Security says that you can work while you apply for benefits or while you are receiving benefits, as long as your earnings do not exceed the amount that's set by Social Security called SGA. So in other words, as long as you don't earn more than the set amount for SGA, you may still be able to continue to receive your benefits. And for Medicare, sorry, I'm going to move this little box over here because nobody in my presentation. Okay, so for Medicare, if you have Medicare and you start working, you may have at least 93 months of extended coverage, including the 9-month trial work period. And after this, you may buy Medicare coverage by paying a monthly premium if no other insurance is available to you. So what if I don't agree with a decision that Social Security makes, which happens a lot? So if Social Security makes a decision that you don't agree with as an applicant or a beneficiary, you have the right to appeal any decision that's made about your benefits. Most of these requests must be made within 60 days of the date that you receive the letter or notice of the decision. And beneficiaries are assumed to have received the letter within 5 days of the date that Social Security sent it. Appeals consist of several levels of administrative review, which is reconsideration, administrative law judge hearing, and the appeals council review. Each of these must be requested during a certain time period. So who should attend benefits counseling? Anyone who is receiving benefits and who is going back into the workforce, or any high school age students that's receiving benefits who's transitioning into adulthood. So the role of the internal benefits specialist is to offer guidance to Social Security beneficiaries and to provide them with the detailed and accurate information on the impact of employment on their benefits, to support beneficiaries' determination and economic self-sufficiency, and to make them aware of programs and services available that may reduce or eliminate their dependency on benefits. So this is accomplished through an information session that's conducted each week to explain the effects of employment and self-employment on income, Social Security disability benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, and all other public assistance programs. And each counselor is also provided with referral forms and information that they will provide for their their clients, to return to the benefits specialist along with the required paperwork for the session. Next slide, please. So next, what happens is the beneficiary will complete the paperwork, or their completed paperwork is faxed over to Social Security, and they will send back what's called a BPQI, which is just a statement of all of their earnings and eligibility, classification, whether they're classified as a disabled worker, et cetera, and any other pertinent information. And this is the key piece of benefits counseling. And the beneficiary's voc rehab counselor is then informed of any situations that will require immediate assistance that's not provided by the internal benefits specialist. And then with that, a referral will be given to the voc rehab counselor for them to refer the person for external benefit services. The extent of this agent's benefits counseling counselor's duties is to provide beneficiaries with information so that they can understand the impact of employment on their benefits, so they can avoid pitfalls or overpayments, and for beneficiaries requiring a greater or more immediate need for assistance, external benefit specialists are utilized. Okay, so how does it all come together? For those who are referred to external benefits counseling providers, the benefit specialists, those benefit specialists will begin to research the beneficiary situation, desired salary ranges for employment, goals, et cetera. This information will be compiled with information by Social Security and benefits information that's self-reporting from the beneficiary. And based on that information, the appropriate calculation sheets are completed and numerical breakdowns of how their cash benefits may be impacted. This information, along with any other factors that may impact their benefits, is then compiled in an individualized report. The external benefit specialist will then review the report with the beneficiaries and the counselors and any other relevant parties, such as their spouses or representative payees, because any employment and status changes can impact spouses or children receiving benefits as well. So once all the parties are clear on the impact of employment and what may happen, and they are able to make an informed choice about their employment journey. Okay. So this is the list or the times and dates for all of the benefits counseling sessions that are internal. And these are just helpful benefits definitions. And that's it. And again, I am Dr. Marquita Seiler. And this time, I guess we will open up for any questions if they're not moving on to anything else, or you can email me or contact me.
Thank you
Before
for that
we move
presentation.
Before people unmute to ask questions, I just did want to note that we have a couple that are in the chat. So I want to get to those, and then people, if they have questions, could unmute.
Okay.
Amy Wallish, who's with Full Circle, thank you, provided in the chat what the SSI amounts for an individual and a couple will be beginning January 1, 2023, which have increased to $914 for an individual and $1,371 for a couple. And that's the largest increase since it's in decades, I think, correct?
Yes.
And so I was going to mention before, as always, the PowerPoint, this PowerPoint, as well as Charlotte's PowerPoint will be available on our website next week. Carol has asked, is benefits counseling only available to people working with RSA? Not exactly, in that if a person with DDA is thinking about going back to work, then we can use, then they would have to go through RSA to have a full benefits analysis done. They can participate in the benefits counseling sessions that are done here at the agency that are that don't go into the level of detail that the full benefits counseling is done by our contract providers. The good thing too is when they do the session here internally, they can talk then with Marquita about whether that met their needs or they would like the more detailed one, in which case we would have to make sure that they were open with RSA, and then we could issue an authorization through RSA to pay for benefits counseling for that person, to do a benefits analysis for that person. There are a few different services under benefits planning that can be done through RSA. And they can be done for anyone supported by DDA or RSA. We just have to make sure that they're open with RSA. We've done a lot of work, I would say, on making sure that that process of someone being referred from DDA to RSA is streamlined and quick and seamless, given that all the eligibility documentation we need for RSA generally is right here in the agency. So there isn't some, while it may take 60 days to determine eligibility for a person who applies for RSA services, a person who's already receiving services from DDA, we have all their information right here. So it requires a signed application and should never take more than 2 weeks. Quote me on that. Because I was being generous to staff here. That was a compromise from what my view is. I also do want to, Ava, I don't know, Ava Richardson with DRDC is here with us. I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself and just present what is available through DRDC regarding benefits. And then if people have any questions for you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, my name is Eva Richardson, and I'm a staff attorney at Disability Rights DC. We're the protection advocacy program for individuals with disabilities in the District of Columbia. And I just wanted to follow up on this helpful presentation about benefits planning and let folks know that DRDC is available to assist district residents who receive SSI or SSDI who have an overpayment from the Social Security Administration that's related to employment. So an overpayment may occur when someone gets benefits above the amount they should be receiving because SSA is not aware of a person's work activity or income level. And we may be able to help when an overpayment impedes a person's ability to secure, maintain, or regain employment. So if you work with someone who has a work-related overpayment from SSA, we can potentially help with appealing that overpayment, requesting a waiver of the overpayment, or requesting a better repayment plan. And we're also available to help SSI or SSDI recipients who face other barriers to employment, such as disability-based discrimination on the job or disputes with SSA related to work incentive programs, for example. And I can put DRDC's intake phone number and website information in the chat box. So feel free to share that with someone if you know anyone who's interested in our services related to overpayments.
Great, thank you very much, Eva, sorry for the mispronunciation earlier. And there's a question here, should providers contact the RSA coordinator if clients are requesting benefits counseling? If you're working with someone and they have a VR counselor and the person wants benefits counseling, then yes, you should make sure that they raise that with their VR counselor. If they are not currently with RSA, then I think you should contact the service coordinator to say that they want benefits counseling. And the service coordinator will work with the person and RSA when necessary to get them the appropriate level of counseling. So I see a question. Why are people processed by RSA required to undergo DDA intake when it could be made easier for them given DDA services having gone through the intake process of RSA? Can't some kind of streamline? Actually, Victor, it would be helpful if you could unmute because I'm not clear about your question. So let me just say a couple of things at the beginning to see if they answer your question. DDS has one front door. People that come in who apply for DDA services also do a front door tool, an employment assessment to see what their interest is in employment, so that when they arrive here, we can make a determination about whether, in addition to DDA, they may also be interested in RSA services. They are two separate administrations, but we are one agency. I think that we're making good strides in coordinating better as one agency. There are some people who are receiving services from DDA who are interested in employment-related services from RSA. And for those folks, as I said, the referral, application, and eligibility process should be pretty streamlined. It's still necessary. The fact that you get DDA services, you have a DDA service coordinator, which is a person with separate qualifications, separate funding, all of this separate from what's provided through RSA by a VR counselor. We do have to have two separate cases, two separate records. So someone is opened in VR if they want VR services, but we are able to provide all the documentation that DDA has with a release to RSA so that the case can be opened. By the same token, we have some folks who start off in RSA who appear will be eligible, will require extended services, and will be eligible for services from DDA. And those people are assisted by their RSA VR counselor with applying for DDA services. To aid us in that, in addition, we have one of our community liaison folks who works to connect people to DDA services, works in our transition unit to make sure that transitioning youth and their families are aware of the availability of transition VR services and DDA services. So if you could clarify where it is you're seeing sort of a problem with how those processes are working. And just unmute and provide that for me because I'm not understanding. Victor Onyekebe. Perhaps I've answered your question.
Somehow, but my question was because we experienced, we had an experience whereby somebody who wanted her work to, transit to the DDS services, felt disappointed and gave up, so she was wondering why she has to go through the process all over again, having gone through the RSA process. People cannot be as patient as maybe needed. So I was, my thinking is that it would be made easier for them to transit without having to do double intake processing.
Okay, I think I've understood you, perhaps, which was you had someone who was, yeah, because there's a lot of noise in the background.
Yeah, because of where we are.
Okay, if you could mute, that'll
Thank
help.
you. Oh, thanks.
Okay, so my understanding was you have someone who's getting services from one administration and wants them from the other administration, and why are there separate application processes? And the answer would be because they are separate services. DDA services, for the most part, are waiver services. Also, we have some services that are provided to people in intermediate care facilities, but about 1,840 of the approximately 2,300 people in DDA receive waiver services. And we have a lot of requirements from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services about how those services are provided. The services provided by RSA related to employment are funded by the Department of Education's vocational rehabilitations as a VR services or supported employment services, and they also have specific requirements. And so we do have separate applications, we have separate records because we are required to by the funding sources. We believe, taken all the steps that we can to make that process as streamlined as possible. And to the extent that someone feels that it's not adequately streamlined, they should speak with either their service coordinator or VR counselor to talk about the challenges they're having in navigating the two systems together, because we do have a meeting every single month between the staff of those two administrations so that they can address any problems with coordination.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Andy, this is Mark Augusto. I just really want to share, as part of Dr. Seiler's presentation and orientation sessions that she conducts weekly, provider staff have been historically invited to attend. So if provider staff are interested in attending those sessions, they can contact Dr. Seiler directly.
Great, thank you, Mark. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions. And I just want to check my notes to make sure there weren't. So just as a reminder, our next meeting will not happen in November. It will happen in early December. It will be a November-December community forum, and that will be on December 9th from 12 to 1:30. I sent an updated invitation to people on the planning committee today. We will plan for that meeting on November the 18th. If anyone here has suggestions about topics for that meeting, please feel free. You can put those in the chat. You could also email those to me at Andrew, ANDREW .Reese, REESE @dc.gov. And that way I can share that with the planning group so that we can make sure that we're providing information to people that is responsive to your interests and needs. So if there are no other questions, I hope everyone has a great weekend. And we will talk again in early December. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reese.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone.